I am a very, very, very old lady with a lot of very interesting life experiences and a lot of wonderful friends. I am an educator, and it's in the old sense. Educare is a beautiful word. It means to lead forth the hidden wholeness in another person. So an educator and a healer and a person who moves the world in a certain direction, all the same. Well, I'm a physician, and I was a classic pediatrician and educator in pediatrics. And when I moved up to the San Francisco area, I began to do psychological work with people with cancer and life-threatening illness. And also to do something about the way medicine was delivered as a technical, I don't know, there was something wrong about what we were doing. And because there was something wrong, our students were burning out. We were separating them from the reason they had come. They wouldn't have called it that, but they're calling. And medicine is a calling. It has been for thousands of years. And it has many spiritual dimensions. It's a practice. You know, there are words that connect it back to its roots. And I was thinking about helping doctors explore, you know, the emotional, spiritual dimensions of medicine. I began organizing a group just to study it. And then something odd happened. 2 medical students went to the dean, and they asked if someone could give a talk on the role of the soul in medicine. 2 first-year medical students. Right? And she was horrified. I mean, she couldn't do that. That would ruin her reputation as a scientist and as a what have you. So she referred them to someone else who also realized that this was not something that was a smart thing to do at the best research school in America. And they were passed along from person to person to person. And finally, they came to someone a doctor, a professor, who was also a Jesuit. And so he also felt that this would not be a good thing to do. But he knew me. We sat on a board together. And so he called and said, would you give a talk on the role of the soul in medicine? And I said, I won't give a talk, but I'd like to do a course. And so we began. And I can tell you the rest of it in a minute, if you will. And I met the 2 young men. Just amazing. And they assigned us a room. It was in not the cellar of the medical school, the sub-cellar of the medical school. And they gave me the number of the room, and I told them to invite anyone who might be interested, and we would do a 2-hour session related to the subject they wanted to do. So we get off the elevator, and there are a few young men down there, mostly men in those days. This is 1991. And we find the room, and we open it, it's full of boxes. It's a storage room. So we're sitting on the boxes, and we talk about the role of love in medicine, and medicine as an act of love, right? For a couple hours. And then they ask us if we would come back. And I have with me a couple of the doctors that I've been working with, and we've been thinking about these things ourselves. And I said, well, this is a great opportunity for them to connect to medical students because they're practitioners. They have no connection to medical students. I said, wonderful. We'll be back in a week. And we come back in a week, and there are, 30 people milling around down there. And I said, oh, somebody else has got a course happening down here at 7 o'clock at night. But no, these are all first-year medical students, and they open a bigger storage room for us, and we have another of our sessions in which they uncover their own thoughts and share with each other in a way that they've never shared before, right? And then they ask us to come back again, and I bring a few more doctors because I now have 30 medical students. And we open the door of the elevator, and the entire freshman medical school class is there waiting for us. So I knew that we had found something that was missing, right? And we've taught the healer's art. We started at UCSF, and then about, oh my goodness, maybe 4 or 5 years into it, a lovely young man came at the end of there's 5 sessions, came at the end of the 5th session and thanked us we're all volunteers, and this is 7 o'clock at night. And he thanked us for our work. And he said, I need to tell you something. I'm not a medical student here, and we don't take attendance. So I said to myself, oh my God, I hope he's a nursing student. I said, no. He said, well, what do you do? He said, oh, I'm a medical student, but I go to Yale. I said, are you on sabbatical? He says, no. I said, but I've seen you here every 2 weeks for months. He says, I fly in. I said, how come you're flying in? He says, my freshman roommate at college told me about this. He is a medical student here. He says it's very important, and I want to bring it to Yale. And I say, oh no, this is a California thing. I mean, we're doing all this imagery and symbols and objects and poetry, and this is, I mean, Yale, oh my God, Cushing went home and had a heart attack and died, and his office is exactly the way it was, 100 years ago. I mean, this is not, and your professors, they don't see patients, they're all researchers. And I go on and on and on, and this lovely young man stands there and waits, and finally he says, but we're going to try, aren't we, Rachel? And he shamed me. So I flew to Yale several times, and I trained the researchers, and they taught the course, and it had exactly the same outcome. This young man is now our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, right? And the course is in over 100 medical schools. 32,000 first-year students have taken it. This is what I do. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about light and dark. And I also want to say, why we're here. We're here because Temple Emanu is 100 years old. 100 years old. And so I'd like to start by saying some old words. The Shechechiyenu, right? Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, sovereign of all worlds, who has given us life and has sustained us and has brought us safely to this moment. This moment, yeah. So, I'd like to talk about light and darkness and offer some thoughts about it, because I think it's the major issue of our times. It shows up everywhere. It shows up in our government. It shows up in our choices. It shows up in our health. It shows up everywhere. And these are very special times in the history of the world, I think. And I thought I'd start by talking about symbols. One of the things the students do in the Healer's Art course is that they choose symbols that represent to them the meaning of their work and ultimately who they are, right? And I, as the person teaching this, have also had a symbol for my work for many, many years. And the symbol is a lighthouse. A lighthouse. When you think about that, ships and people in the dark, struggling to find a safe harbor in the darkness. I think that pretty much describes us all lately, trying to find a safe harbor in the darkness. And the lighthouse marks the entrance to the harbor. It stands on the rocks and holds the light steady, right? So that the ships that are lost in the dark can find their way to the safe harbor. Okay? And my grandfather was an Orthodox rabbi and a Kabbalist, right? And when I was very small, I asked him what he did in his synagogue. What did he do? He was the rabbi. What did he do in his synagogue? And what he said, that in every synagogue there was a light that never went out. And his job was to tend that light, right? To hold it steady, to keep it burning, so that people lost in the dark can find the safe harbor of the synagogue. And the light in Temple Emanu has been burning for 100 years. 100 years. It has been passed from hand to hand, not just for months or for decades, but for generations. Yeah? And some of you who are here in the synagogue now have been born in Nevada, and others have crossed oceans and continents to be here. But each of you is a part of the creation of the safe harbor and the holding of the steady light. I think you know how deeply honored I am to have been invited to talk to you at this time. You know, there are stories also that have been passed down for hundreds of years. And I'm a storyteller. I think stories are what help us to live and remember who we are and what we may be. And I want to talk about some of the stories that have been passed down about light and darkness, because I think they're most relevant to the issues that face us every single day in today's world. And I think these stories can help us to live as they have helped generations of other people to live. So let me start with the first story. My grandpa was a storyteller, and he was a student of Kabbalah, a mystic, right? So many of his stories have a mystical dimension to them. And this is an important story. Many of you have heard it before. It's called The Story of the Birthday of the World. And it's told usually on Rosh Hashanah, which is going to happen in a few days from now. Right? And it goes like this. In the beginning, there's only the holy darkness, the Ein Sof, the source of life. And at some point in the history of things, the whole world as we know it emerges from the heart of the holy darkness as rays of light, of holy light. And then, there, probably because this is a Jewish story, there's an accident. And the vessels that hold the light break open, and the light of the world is broken up into a million billion sparks of light. And they fall into everything and everyone. They fall into each one of us and everything that breathes and lives. They fall into all organizations. They fall into all events and obviously all people, where they remain hidden, deeply hidden, until this very day. Now, according to my grandfather, this is the reason for the whole human race, this accident that broke up the light. We are here because we are a response to this accident. We all have the capacity to uncover the hidden wholeness, the hidden light in everything and everyone. We can see it, we can nurture it, we can strengthen it in each other. We can lift it up and make it visible once again and restore the world back to its original wholeness, right? And this is Tikkun Olam, is the name for this process, service, Tikkun Olam, right? And my grandfather used different words because he was talking to a 4-year-old little girl. he said we can all bless others. And we can receive the blessings of life from others. And as a child, I had taken this story very, very personally, that I and everyone around me could restore the light to the world, that the light was not gone. The light was just hidden. And the story suggests that service, right, defines us as human beings. It's central to human nature. It links us to the very purpose of our lives. We're made in such a way that we can choose to make a difference. And buried in every human heart is the hope that this might indeed be so. And the most important part of the old story for me is that we value people because of what they know, what their skills are, their expertise, their ability to accumulate money or goods or build things and what have you. But the old story says that we are enough, just as we are, to restore the world to its wholeness. We don't need to be perfect to serve this purpose. We don't need to be smart. We don't need to be rich. We can strengthen the wholeness in the world just exactly as we are. And I find that story exceptionally empowering. Exceptionally empowering. And then there's another story about darkness and light that I would like to read to you. And again, these are the wisdom stories. This is part of Judaism, that the stories which help us to live, remind us of who we are and what matters, are passed from hand to hand, not just for 100 years, but for thousands of years. And these stories are part of our lineage, and they are of enormous value at this particular time in the history of the world. Yeah. So the story I'm going to read you has many sources, perhaps the oldest being the Babylonian Torah. It's the legend of the Lamed Vav, the Lamed Vav. In this story, God tells us that he will allow the world to continue as long as at any given time there are a minimum of 36 good people in the human race. People who are capable of responding to the suffering which is a part of the human condition. The 36 are called the Lamed Vav. If at any time there are fewer than 36 such people alive, the world will come to an end. Do you know who these people are, Grandpa? I asked, certain he would say yes. And I was so young, I was about 4, and I had just discovered about movie stars. So I was sure that they were movie stars, right? And he said, no, Neshumala, only God knows who the Lamed Vav are. Even the Lamed Vavniks themselves do not know for sure the role they have in the continuation of the world, and no one else knows it either. And let me read that again, because that's a key piece of this story. Only God knows who the Lamed Vav are. Even the Lamed Vavniks themselves do not know the role they have in the continuation of the world, and no one else knows it either. They respond to the suffering not in order to save the world, but only because the suffering of others touches them and matters to them. It turned out that the Lamed Vavniks could be tailors or college professors, millionaires or paupers, powerful leaders or powerless victims. These things were not important. What mattered was only their capacity to respond to the suffering around them and to feel the collective suffering of the human race. And because no one knows who they are, Neshumala, my grandfather said, anyone you meet might be one of the 36 for whom God preserves the world. It is important to treat everyone as if this might be so. I sat and thought about the story for a long time. It was a different story than the story of Noah's Ark. The rainbow meant that there would be a happy ever after ending, just like the stories my father read to me at bedtime. But Grandpa's story made no such promises. God asked something of people in return for the gift of life, and he was asking it now. Suddenly I realized I had no idea what it was that God was asking of us. If so much depended on it, it must be something very hard, something that required a great sacrifice. And what if the Lamed Vav couldn't do it? What then? How do the Lamed Vav respond to the suffering, Grandpa? I asked him, suddenly anxious. What do they have to do? My grandfather smiled at me tenderly. Ah, Neshumala, he told me, they do not need to do anything. They respond to the suffering with compassion. Without compassion, the world cannot continue. Our compassion blesses and sustains the world. Recovering a greater compassion may require us to confront the core values of our culture. We are a culture that values mastery and control, that cultivates self-sufficiency, competence, and independence. But in the shadow of these values lies a profound sense of isolation from our human wholeness. As individuals and as a culture, we have developed a sort of contempt for anything in ourselves and in others that has needs and is capable of suffering. It is not a gentle world. As life becomes colder and somehow harder, we struggle to create places of safety for ourselves and for those we love through our learning, our skills, our income. We build places of security in our homes and offices and even in our cars. These places separate us from one another. Places that separate people can never be safe enough. Perhaps our only refuge is in the goodness in one another. In a highly technical world, we may forget our own goodness and place value on our skills and expertise, but it's not our expertise that will repair the world. Perhaps the future will depend less on our expertise and more on our love for one another. So, Temple Emanu is a place where that love becomes visible. I am so honored to be invited to its 100th birthday party.